Please like, share and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.
Hi everybody, Grandmaster Ron Ambleton here with my next part of this Chess.com bullet video series. This part is about flagging and the time scramble part of the game. This happens in almost every bullet game. Right at the end of the game, we all know what happens. It goes into a mad frenzy where both players potentially have less than 5 seconds on the clock, and whoever is much better at prediction or pre-moves is going to take the win. So I'm going to give you my advice on how to play those time scrambles and most importantly how to flag somebody. Let's take a look at the example on the board right here, and we see that white has potentially just queened his h-pawn. Now he has a new queen on the board. Let's go for the scenario where white has 1 second against black having 4 seconds. Now in this case, with 1 second on the clock, you can be pretty sure in this situation that you are not going to checkmate the black king, because you're going to need this king to go all the way probably down here, the queen to go here or here and cut the black king off on the side of the board, and then deliver a checkmate. That's a lot of moves and it requires cooperation from your opponent. So more likely you're just going to have to flag the opponent here. Now let's go over some tips for flagging, because a lot of people very instinctively would just check and then maybe pre-move some checks. Those are good, but you could potentially do even better. One of the best ways to pre-move and flag your opponent is to play the move that's not check. Because if you put your opponent in check, it's very easy to understand that they have to move out of check. But if I make a move right here, after seeing this, like queen here, all of a sudden, he has to choose from squares like that. Since he just got checked, he's naturally going to be pre-moving in this direction. You always pre-move away from where you get attacked from, and you like to move in the same direction generally. So if then the king goes here, then I might pre-move this move. And all of a sudden he has to go back. It's really, you want to just confuse him. He goes here, I might pre-move this. Now he can't go back to the square that he was just shuffling to. And again, I'm just pre-moving to random squares, around the king. I don't want to put him in check. I just want to control as many squares around the king as possible. Not putting him in stalemate, of course, but eventually your 1 second is going to tick down 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. As soon as it gets down to 0.3, this is when I recommend doing moves like this. You pre-move this because he might be pre-moving anyway. He's either going to waste a lot of time trying to take your queen, or he's going to move somewhere like this and then you pre-move queen to f3, for example. And this will be your move that you make with 0.1 seconds on your clock. So it's a very nice last-ditch attempt to try to flag your opponent. So you start doing these moves when you have 0.3, 0.2 seconds. These are your last couple pre-moves. Sacrifice your queen. You know it's going to be a draw anyway. But with 1 second against 4, sometimes I see people with a lot of extra material try to go for a checkmate, and it's just not going to happen. Much better to try to flag your opponent by making very tricky pre-moves and covering squares, but not checking them. Very important not to check your opponent when you're trying to flag them. Another position that we want to take a look at are positions like this. In this position, pre-moving is very, very tricky. Now, a lot of the times what happens is black would pre-move between these two squares, and in the meantime, white is going to play g4, sneak that pre-move past, and there you go. White would probably go on to win this game. So when you're in a time scramble and you're trying to flag your opponent, first of all, always clarify the pawn structure. That's my best piece of advice. If I'm black or if I'm white here, I want to push one of these pawns forward. And the reason is, if I'm shuffling, pre-moving, I don't want to see black go like this and then take my pawn. I'll never be able to expect when he's going to do that. So I actually want to push this pawn myself. If I play a4 and I get this position, as white, I don't have anything to worry about. As black, I do. I have to be careful of g4 the entire time. And it's a really tough position to be in. So white probably has the advantage in the time scramble here. My advice for white, obviously try to sneak this move in. My advice for black, pre-move your king over here, so that if this move happens, it's not a big deal, and at some point when white moves his king, you could try sprinting your pawn down the board. But be very careful of positions where the pawn tension has not been clarified yet, and especially positions like this where one pawn can sort of sneak by everything, all your defenses, and that will happen in a time scramble. People will go for those sneaky, dirty moves when everybody has, just a couple seconds on the clock. Trying to sneak that pawn by is a very common trick. So be careful of that and try to clarify the pawn structure as soon as possible. Make sure that there's no openings for moves like this. Also, in positions like this goes for rook endgame, queen endgame, anything that's really symmetrical and it's all about flagging. Make moves that are safe. In positions like this, I don't like to see the queens loose like this, undefended. So if I'm white, I'm playing queen e3 immediately. I might be pre-moving king h2, I'll pre-move g3, I'll play queen f4, h4, king g2, queen f3. These are all my type of pre-moves. Why? They're all around my king. When you're trying to flag someone, you want to make the moves that are safe so that, you know, there's always that balance when you're trying to flag. Do I play really bad moves that are just quick, or do I look for a good move? Well, this is the balance. These aren't great moves, but they're not bad moves, and they're all safe. So even if your opponent is trying to pre-move trick you, let's say he's crazy, he doesn't move like this, and you had already pre-moved this, it's not the end of the world, right? He's going to waste time probably taking you, and at the end of the day, you know, you didn't lose your whole queen. But it could work out a lot worse if your queen was sitting on c1 and they did some crazy move like this to just try to take your queen. So you want to avoid leaving your pieces on pre's and try to make moves that are around your king. When you're flagging someone, at some point you will have to go for that desperate sacrifice of your piece at the end, but you don't have to do that right now. Finally, it's really important to remember that in terms of flagging somebody, positions like this in bullet are almost winning for white. If I had a knight on c3 instead of a bishop on d3, the same thing applies, but the concept is the same. These positions are almost winning because there is pawn weakness on d5 and I have the bishop that can attack it. Now, don't get me wrong, in positions like this, this isn't winning. No way this is winning in a classical game. I'm going to play bishop to b3, attack that pawn, and black basically has to defend it for the entire endgame. I'm going to continue to put my pawns on dark squares, look to make a little progress. When the time comes, I might be able to, you know, push a pawn and look for a pre-move where I just win a pawn. It doesn't matter. These positions are usually winning for white as long as you have all your pawns on the opposite color of a bishop. It's very powerful in the endgame. Of course, we all know that a knight is more powerful than a rook sometimes in a time scramble, but in terms of flagging, the most important thing is that bishops are very, very bad. If you have a bishop, then what your opponent wants to do is put the pawns on the opposite color of that bishop, and it makes it really easy to pre-move. In this position, as white, the only pre-move I'm scared of is bishop here taking my bishop, but you know, if black goes and puts all his pawns on light squares, then he constantly has to worry about maybe I pre-move and pick some of these pawns off. So bishops are really bad in time scrambles because all you do is put your pawns on the opposite color, and it's really hard for your opponent to generate any threats, and you can just pre-move your way to victory and flag your opponent. So those are some of my tricks for flagging, making sure that when you're in that time scramble, it's really important to look at the clock and decide what your objective should be. Sometimes you can go for a checkmate. Sometimes you just need to flag your opponent. So if your opponent has a big time advantage and you don't have enough time to mate, try to give up your pieces instead. I think the best example or the most important piece of advice to take away here is when you're pre-moving in a time scramble, don't check your opponent. Try to understand what moves he's trying to make next. A lot of times you'll see people just run their king. And it's really important that when they do that, you're not just checking them. If you check them, they're going to keep running. But if you cover the square that they're planning to run to, it's really going to throw them off. So try to contain your opponent's pieces, especially their king, in a time scramble. And most importantly, do not check them, rather control the squares that they're going to move to. I think that is the best piece of advice for flagging somebody. And do not sacrifice your pieces too early. It's important that in a time scramble, when you're dealing with, let's say, less than 2 seconds each, at some point, somebody is just going to sack their whole queen and give this crazy check and win the game on time.